Well, hey guys, welcome back to part 2 of Bryan Johnson's hair routine. In this video, I'm going to be reacting to all the different treatments he is trying to reverse his hair loss.
I started to lose my hair and go gray in my late 20s. I'm now 46. It's been a lot of hard work to keep the hair I have. Today, I'm going to walk you through my protocol, what I do on a daily, weekly, and monthly basis. I'm also going to share with you some special tips on how we've reversed my gray hair. Preliminary results, but we're encouraged. Now, it's important to note that the best time to work on your hair is before you start losing it. A lot of people wait until they start seeing a lot of shedding. Don't wait. Start doing hair care immediately. Now, if you're in your early 20s, mid 20s, good time to start taking note that it's important. Otherwise, it's harder to catch it when you're already down that path.
If you are dealing with hair loss, the most important thing is knowing what type of hair loss you have. There are many types of hair loss, and getting the right diagnosis is key. Otherwise, you can try a bunch of things and they may not be effective. And as he suggests, treating hair loss early is key to getting the best outcome. Now, the most common type of hair loss in both men and women is something called androgenetic alopecia. This is a type of hair loss where the hair follicles, for whatever reason, are exquisitely sensitive to the androgen male hormones, specifically the potent form of testosterone, dihydrotestosterone. This binds to the androgen receptor in the hair follicle and causes it to miniaturize, turn into a little baby vellus hair.
First thing I do in the morning every day is I wear this red light therapy cap. It has 312 laser diodes. You put on the head, you turn it on, it's battery powered. And so I can walk about and do my morning routine without having to sit down. It increases blood flow and also stimulates hair follicle activity. The studies on this are pretty good. It's not the most powerful treatment we do, but still it's part of the stack. And so all these little things add up. So every day, 6 minutes.
Low-level laser therapy, otherwise known as photobiomodulation, is a light-based therapy that uses red and near-infrared wavelengths of light, which are absorbed by selective targets in the skin and the hair follicle. And that generates a cascade of events that has a cellular outcome, namely improving cell metabolism. The target is actually something in the mitochondria called COX, and that initiates a cascade that leads to an increase in production of ATP, the energy source, and ultimately that stimulates cell proliferation, cell metabolism. This treatment also can lead to dilation of blood vessels, bringing in more blood flow and growth factors. Low-level laser therapy, whether it be something that you pursue in office, an in-office treatment, or something that you do at home, is actually a pretty effective treatment option for androgenetic alopecia, as well as another type of hair loss called alopecia areata. There have actually been many randomized controlled trials looking at low-level laser therapy for androgenetic alopecia, and there are meta-analyses that analyze all of the available research, and all in all, those analyses conclude that yes, this is an effective therapeutic modality to consider for androgenetic alopecia. Across all the randomized controlled trials looking at low-level laser therapy for androgenetic alopecia, they consistently show an improvement in hair density and hair length. Photobiomodulation works with hair to increase the duration of the growing phase of the hair cycle. That's why one benefit of using it is not only an increase in hair density, but also an increase in the length of the hair, because you're prolonging the anagen phase of the growth cycle. And it's something that you actually can do at home. In order to achieve the results that you're looking for with low-level laser therapy, you need to do it a couple of times a week. So coming in for treatment that often may not be doable for everyone, but it can be effective done at home. There are a variety of devices on the market. Looks like he's using a cap. It's only as good so long as you are willing to use it consistently. So it has to be something that fits into your routine. And another advantage of them is that they can be combined with other treatments, many of which we'll talk about in this video. Things like minoxidil, for example. They can also be effective for people who are considered non-responders, like they don't really seem to be getting good results from the other established therapies out there. What are the side effects of doing this? Typically mild irritation is possible, a little bit of itch, redness, but by and large, they're generally well tolerated. How long does it take to see results from something like this? Typically anywhere from 16 to 24 weeks, although you may see some improvement a little bit earlier. All right, let's see what he's been putting on his scalp.
All right, the next thing I do is I apply this topical to my scalp on a daily basis. You've probably heard of topicals like Rogaine and minoxidil 5%. Both are effective. We added a bunch of other goodies to our topical formulation We found it in the evidence, and then we had a local compounded pharmacy make it for us. So we've published this recipe, and you can take that recipe, share it with a compounded pharmacy, and have them make it for you. Kind of a hassle, I know, but it's the only way to get it done. You can also go to groups that sell these formulations. They may not have all the things we've listed, but if they've got the basics like minoxidil, then cool. But we really tried to create the most powerful hair formulation, and that's what we have. So hopefully it's helpful for you at least to know the things we're trying to play with on the topical. I apply it once a day. You can apply it twice a day, morning and evening. So really your preference.
5% minoxidil is one of the most established treatments for androgenetic alopecia. It's FDA approved for the condition. You can buy it over the counter without a prescription. And we'll get into some of the other stuff in this formula in a moment. Do you actually need these things? Are they beneficial? But long story short, 5% minoxidil, it is a go-to for androgenetic alopecia. It's most effective typically on thinning and hair loss on the vertex part of the scalp, the top of the scalp. A little bit less so for thinning on the sides, but all that to say, it definitely can be effective. However, some people just don't respond well to it. The drug itself, minoxidil, actually needs to be converted to minoxidil sulfate. That's what works. And it works to then increase the number of hairs in the growing phase of the hair cycle. If you've never used it before, you have to be aware of the fact that initially it makes more of your hair shed. That's nothing to be worried about. That's part of how it works. Those hairs would have shed anyway. It's just moving things along more quickly to get the hairs back on track in the growing phase of the hair cycle. In order to maintain the results with minoxidil, you have to keep using it. And then when you stop, your hair loss will go back to where it was had you never used it. So it's definitely not a cure, and it's something you have to continue, but it certainly does work for many people, although not all, because again, it has to be converted to minoxidil sulfate. That is actually the active form. That requires an enzyme, and it appears as though some people don't have either robust levels of that enzyme or the activity of it is a little low. They don't respond. People who don't get such great results with minoxidil, they can get a little bit better results when combined with topical tretinoin, which is thought to increase the expression of that enzyme, the sulfotransferase, needed to get minoxidil in its active state. Also, tretinoin may enhance penetration of minoxidil down into the follicle. Some people who get suboptimal results with minoxidil alone or don't respond, they get good results when they either combine it with low-level laser therapy, or if they just try low-level laser therapy, like a laser cap at home, then they're able to start seeing some results. So all that to say, if you've tried minoxidil, it didn't work for you, there are some other avenues to go to either get it to work, or there are just other things that you might want to pursue aside from minoxidil. But it's the most evidence-based, it's one of the most evidence-based things for androgenetic alopecia in both men and women. Now he's using the 5% strength, which is very effective. There is a 2% strength, which you also can buy without a prescription, that is marketed mostly for women. If you are a man, you are unlikely to respond to the 2% strength. If you're a woman, you might not respond to the 2% strength. It's pretty weak. And so just keep that in mind. I just tell people to go ahead and get the 5%. His compounded formula also contains finasteride. Oral finasteride that you take by mouth is actually FDA approved for androgenetic alopecia. It's used in men. So the way finasteride works is it actually inhibits an enzyme that converts testosterone over to this more potent form, dihydrotestosterone. Enzyme is called a 5-alpha reductase. So it's a 5-alpha reductase inhibitor. When you take it by mouth, there can be some side effects, which many people do not care for. And so the idea of having it just to the scalp, just to the follicles, is desirable. So is topical finasteride effective? There is some research to suggest that yes, topical finasteride certainly can be effective. One study suggested that it is even as effective as the oral. However, one caveat is that that study only looked at out to 6 months, so it's hard to say if long-term it has the same efficacy. But overall, it's desirable to apply it to the scalp. In theory, there are less side effects, less absorption. The absorption is very low. That being said, topical finasteride is not completely side effect free. Reports of side effects include anything from just redness and contact dermatitis of the scalp. Some people develop lightheadedness. Other people in these studies developed elevated liver enzymes. Some people had headaches, dizziness, also testicular pain. I also noticed that his formula has caffeine. Now I have a video on here all about caffeine for androgenetic alopecia, topical caffeine that you apply to your scalp. It's actually very promising for androgenetic alopecia. It shows very good penetration into the hair follicle, which is always a challenge with ingredients is penetration. So yeah, it definitely can get into the follicle. Caffeine is an antioxidant. Anything that puts undue oxidative stress on the follicle kind of can push things over the edge for more miniaturization. But it also inhibits something called phosphodiesterase. And the consequences of that are an increase in cyclic AMP, which ultimately promotes better cell metabolism, proliferation. The clinical studies we have on it do suggest it can be effective, can be as effective as 5% minoxidil. This formula I noticed also has azelaic acid. Now, azelaic acid is an acne treatment. It's also good for rosacea. It's good for melasma. I have tons of videos on my channel regarding azelaic acid. There is some evidence that it can inhibit 5-alpha reductase, so it makes sense to consider it. It's also anti-inflammatory. And then melatonin has a track record of efficacy for androgenetic alopecia. Not robust, but it definitely shows promise. There are quite a few studies showing positive effects on hair growth, maybe through its antioxidant effect or through an anti-androgen effect. In the description box, I'm going to link my video going into more detail regarding the studies on topical melatonin for androgenetic alopecia. So check that out if you're interested in more info. Tea tree oil. So tea tree oil is interesting. It's an essential oil that has anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial compounds in it. I always caution against taking straight tea tree oil and putting it on the skin, including your scalp, because you can develop pretty horrific contact dermatitis. All that to say, there is one study that looked at tea tree oil for androgenetic alopecia, again, because it does have anti-inflammatory and antimicrobial compounds. The study looked at a combination of tea tree oil and diclofenac, which I noticed his formula also contains. Diclofenac is an anti-inflammatory. So the study looked at a combination of minoxidil, diclofenac, and tea tree oil versus minoxidil alone. For androgenetic alopecia, those getting the 3 ingredients showed an earlier response in terms of their hair started improving earlier in comparison to the minoxidil only. I would say more research is needed. Also notice he's got rosemary oil in there. Now, a lot of people sing the praises of rosemary oil for hair growth. I will warn you that there's only one study looking at it, and the study that showed that it was beneficial for androgenetic alopecia showed that it was as beneficial, meaning as good for androgenetic alopecia, as 2% minoxidil. Remember, 2% minoxidil is not very good. It's suboptimal. So saying rosemary oil is as good as 2% minoxidil is basically like saying, it doesn't appear to be that great. More research is needed on rosemary oil, but it doesn't surprise me that that was included. Some of the other things in this formula perhaps could be anti-inflammatory. Biotin is the one I always side-eye. To what extent that's going to be beneficial. Biotin is really important for healthy hair growth. Applying it to the scalp, I'm not sure that's going to do much, if anything. A lot of people take various hair growth supplements that have high doses of biotin, despite the fact that taking biotin supplements in the absence of a confirmed biotin deficiency does not help the hair growth and can have negative side effects. Namely, the high dose biotin in these supplements interferes with the accuracy of blood work that you might be, that might be necessary for evaluating certain things like, oh, are you having a heart attack? Oh, is your thyroid messed up? All right, so overall though, I would say the formula looks pretty good. Makes sense. If you're gonna go out of your way and compound something, it can start getting expensive. The thing in there that's most evidence-based is minoxidil. But everything else in the formula, it makes sense to have it in there, and it may be adding a little bit of extra support. Moving on, what else is he doing?
And the one thing we do to enhance the benefits of the topicals, this and others, is we do microneedling. We've been not consistent with this. So we did it for a while, and then we did so many things in the Blueprint protocol, it kind of got pushed out. So we think it's efficacious. We think it's also a good thing. We were also a little worried because I was doing so many things for my hair. I was doing PRP and microneedling, and we were a bit worried that I was causing too much trauma to my scalp. So just a note that I do sometimes pair microneedling with the topical.
Microneedling shows promise for androgenetic alopecia. creates these little tiny channels with these little teeny tiny needles, and that does a few things. It stimulates growth factors to come in and potentially help improve the health of the hair follicle so that you get reversal of miniaturization in theory. And it may also activate wound healing pathways. But importantly, and kind of what he is getting at here, is it allows for enhanced delivery of topicals. So those ingredients in his formula have a better chance of getting in to the scalp, into the follicle. In-office microneedling shows promise and it can be effective, especially for non-responders to typical therapy. So people who don't get good results with minoxidil and or a DHT inhibitor like finasteride or dutasteride. What about doing it yourself at home? I caution about that. There is a risk of infection. And even getting it in office, there's a risk of infection. It can be painful, it can lead to bruising, and also folliculitis, which is basically an inflammation either related to infection or just irritation around the hair follicle. All that to say, microneedling certainly can be effective. People who use minoxidil may get better results when it's combined with microneedling, again, probably because of enhanced penetration, but be cautious. I don't recommend necessarily doing it yourself at home because of the risk of infection. Now, what about PRP? He hinted around that he has done that as well. So PRP, platelet-rich plasma. There's evidence showing that it works and that people get good results. High patient satisfaction. What does it entail? You go in, they withdraw blood from a vein, they spin it down in a centrifuge to separate out the red blood cells. They take the plasma, which is in theory enriched for growth factors, and then they inject it, well, in this case, into your scalp, down into the deeper layers of the skin, the dermis. In theory, they are injecting your own growth factors to the scalp to help get those follicles to get back in the growing phase of the hair cycle. Can be very painful. There's not really a good long-term studies on how effective it is. And in order to maintain the results that you get with PRP, you have to keep coming back for those injections. Another thing about PRP, it appears to really be most effective for those more earlier cases of androgenetic alopecia, kind of like what he was suggesting, catching it earlier on. The follicle has a better chance of responding. Whereas if you have more significant balding, then to what extent it's going to be effective, it seems less likely. 2 videos ago, I reacted to the fact that he has been doing exosomes into the scalp. Exosomes are a new hot topic area. People are all jazzed about exosomes. So exosomes, they are little membrane-bound vesicles that get released from cells. They contain things like growth factors, proteins, and they're really an area of active research interest. But I have not seen any good studies on exosomes for really anything in actual people, for skin, for rejuvenation, or for androgenetic alopecia. Most of the stuff, has been looking at cells in a dish type studies. And I have questions, and at the end of the day, it's like all this expensive molecular biology, right, of extracting these exosomes and putting them back in the skin with a laser. Show me the data that compares that to just plain Jane minoxidil. And if there are significant differences and no harms, then I'll be excited. But until then, just go to Costco and get the Kirkland. I'm not sponsored by Costco. Get the Kirkland minoxidil. That would be my first line recommendation.
Then also, there's just some basic stuff like being careful with your hair. Not combing too hard, not pulling really hard at the follicles. It's delicate, so just being mindful about that. Not having hair pulling fights. That's not a good thing for hair care. We're always pushing for something new and more powerful. And so this is what's worked today.
All right, so yeah, don't get in a hair pulling fight. That sounds like, a lighthearted ending to this, but keep in mind that anything that puts undue traction on the hair, tight braids, tight hairstyles, it can lead to something called traction alopecia. It's not uncommon for people to have more than one type of hair loss process going on. Like you can have androgenetic alopecia, but you can also have some traction going on if you're someone who wears a really tight hairstyle all the time. So to his point, yes, do not put a lot of traction on the hair. As a side note, I have a video all about ways to minimize and reduce the risk of traction alopecia, how to change up your hairstyles. I'm going to link that down below in the description box, because it's not as though you can never braid your hair again, but you do want to be changing it up and changing things up in certain ways, which I outline in that video. Everything he's doing here is actually not that bizarre or over the top. In my opinion, he looks like he is responding to minoxidil. Everything else he's doing could just be unnecessary. You know, had he gotten on here and said, this was my hair before I started anything, I tried minoxidil first and did only minoxidil for X number of months, and this is the response I got with only minoxidil, and then I moved on to other things, like, then you could kind of start to see how some of these things for him maybe, you know, had more of a contributory effect. But that wasn't the journey he went on. He kind of, at least my impression from this is, he went all in and did all sorts of things. And it's not clear how long he's been doing all of these things. Maybe he outlined that in another video. But slowing down and reversing androgenetic alopecia, it's a slow process. It takes time and it requires consistency. And you do have to stay on the treatments in order to maintain the results. There's really no one and done thing with androgenetic alopecia. So keep that in mind. Like I said at the start of the video, don't just assume your hair loss process is androgenetic alopecia. You want to make sure you have it evaluated, get an accurate diagnosis. That is key. That way you don't waste time doing things that are unnecessary or not going to be effective for you. And you also don't lose time on potential for more effective therapies that actually could, you know, truly slow down whatever it is that you are dealing with in terms of hair loss. Now, the one thing I noticed he did not include is good old ketoconazole shampoo. I have a video all about this, but topical ketoconazole, it's an antifungal. It's used as an anti-dandruff ingredient. There's evidence that it inhibits 5-alpha reductase, that enzyme that converts testosterone to the more potent form that leads to follicle miniaturization. So that would be the only thing that would be pretty reasonable, straightforward to add. All right, y'all, that's what I wanted to share with you in today's video. Now, if you missed my last video, I reacted to the next half of this video where he talks about his gray hair reversal. On the end slate, I'm going to link that video, so check it out next if you're interested. But if you like this one, give it a thumbs up, share it with your friends, and as always, don't forget, sunscreen and subscribe. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. Bye.